Hello everyone, welcome to Analog IAS Current Affair Analysis for 27th November 2020. In this video, we'll be discussing about the urban resilience and the need for disaster management practices to be incorporated in urban planning and the steps that are to be taken by the city level bodies. And in the second article, we'll be talking about the anti-religious conversions laws and the issues associated with this and how it is relevant to the fundamental rights discourse. Storm Warnings is an article taken from the Hindu, and it is about how the governments can plan and ensure that cyclone management happens in a better way by investing in urban planning and infrastructure. So, the frequency of urban floods due to high intensity rainfall is increasing over the years. Because of this, flooding and disruption have become the new normal for the monsoon season in urban India. We have seen recently, we have seen the case of Hyderabad. Previously, there have been cases of Mumbai, Chennai, Kerala floods. All this show that we have to change our way of planning our cities. There are some of the reasons why urban floods are even more dangerous, especially to the Indian context in cities. A special feature in India is heavy rainfall during monsoons. There are other weather systems also that bring a lot of rain, but storm surges and monsoons specifically affect the cities, and even more if they are on the coast. So, the case that we have seen in Chennai also makes it more vulnerable because of the fact that it is on the coast. If we take a look at some other reasons, there is this effect of urban heat island. So, because of the concrete jungles without any trees, what we are witnessing is a phase of climate change globally, which is resulting in the changed weather patterns and increased episodes of high intensity rainfall over a short period of time. This started way back in 2015 and it is becoming even more intense as time passes. The next thing that we have to talk about in the case of cities is stormwater drain systems. We don't have dedicated stormwater drain systems in a lot of cities. So these systems in the past were designed for a rainfall intensity of say somewhere around 12 to 20 mm, and these capacities get easily overwhelmed when rainfall of higher intensity is experienced. This is what happened in Hyderabad when the rainfall is nearly 38 to 40 centimeters in a single day. The next problem is that of encroachments. Encroachments are also a major problem in many cities and towns. The flow of water has increased in proportion to the urbanization of the watersheds. Take the case of Chennai in 2015. The major reason Chennai witnessed such devastation is because most of the apartments, which are considered to be very plush and upscale, are constructed in the basement of Adayar River. So these catchment areas, which together form the system of Adayar River, are blocked by these encroachments, and therefore the damage done in those areas is much more severe. Ideally, the natural drain should have been widened, similar to road widening for increased traffic to accommodate the higher flows of stormwater. But what we are actually doing is exactly on the opposite. Instead of increasing the drainage system, we are overwhelming them. That is the reason we are witnessing such a scale of damage. So, improper disposal of solid waste, including domestic, commercial, and industrial waste, and dumping of construction debris into the drains is also significantly reducing drainage capacities. All these constitute the man made reasons which were responsible for this recent phenomenon of urban flooding. Now, to reduce this risk, we have to follow certain measures. Now, let us have a look at them one by one. So, what are the components of urban planning that should be incorporated into our design so as to develop resilience for future such events? Because it is evident right now that with climate change, this sort of events are going to repeat quite frequently in the future as well. So, if you have to talk about the urban planning components and the structural measures that we should take, the first one is pre-monsoon desilting is the first step needed. So pre-monsoon desilting means if you take a look at a lot of drains, they get clogged because of the indiscriminate dumping of all this construction waste, which reduces the capacity. Second one is solid waste management. The management with respect to solid waste has been pretty ordinary in most of the Indian cities, and its proper management has significant effect on drainage performance, and it decongests the drainages, and efficiency of the performance of these drainage systems increases. So it reduces the chances of choking the drainage system also. So solid waste management is the next step that we should take. Third one is with respect to the protection and conservation of wetlands. As seen in the case of Chennai as well as Hyderabad, the major reason as to why urban flooding has been so prominent is because most of the wetlands in the urban areas have been encroached upon. The next step that we should take involves rainwater harvesting. Rainwater harvesting must become a mandatory procedure for all the constructions that are happening within the limits of the cities. So this reduces the load of excess water of rain and help in mitigating the urban floods as well. So apart from this urban planning components, we also have to focus on the National Disaster Management Authorities guidelines that were laid down in the National Disaster Management Plans. So this requires building capacities and not just relying upon the disaster management force. So this capacity building must happen at state level as well as local body level as well. Only then we'll be in a position to handle the future cyclones and other extreme events. So specifically this article is talking about cyclones, and the impact is much largely felt on cities. That is the reason why we are focusing on urban planning. The other side of it is we have to develop rural resilience in the form of having structures for rehabilitation of the vulnerable section. So this rehabilitation requires certain homes, as seen in the case of Odisha has developed a huge network of these safe homes which acted as centers of rehabilitation during cyclones. So the bottom line that we're talking about here is mainstreaming disaster risk reduction practices. So that is the gist of this article. The second article for the day, Policing Faith, is taken from the Hindu, and this raises concerns over interfaith marriages and also at the same time talks about how this anti-conversion laws are against the ethos laid down in the fundamental rights. So over the centuries, casteism and religionism has prevailed in our country, and despite several laws, the social stigma for interfaith marriages still exists in our society. It is in this context we have seen a set of laws which tried to criminalize forceful or unlawful religious conversions. Several state governments have shown concerns about enacting proper laws to stop marriages, which those states refer to as love jihad. However, contemplating laws over interfaith marriage directly violates the several rights of people, such as right to freedom, and at the same time it will also have repercussions on article 21, that is personal liberty and right to life. So the matrimonial relationship between two individuals having different religious faiths is called as interfaith marriage. Although marrying into different religion is a matter of choice of an adult, there are certain issues regarding the same. The first one is forced conversion. We have seen a lot of cases regarding forced conversions. So if you take the Muslim personal law, in order to get married to a non-Muslim, conversion of religion is the only way. Similarly, there is no provision regarding caste determination of children born out of intercaste marriages. Hindu religion also allows only monogamy, and those who want to marry for the second time has to convert to some other religion. And at the same time, there is the Special Marriage Act of 1954. But the problem is, even though there is a progressive law, the society is not in a position to accept this. So there are certain segments of the society which are not mature enough to appreciate the nuances of this law. So there is a debate over the validity of Article 226 in the context of annulling the interfaith marriage by High Court as well. So all these issues have culminated into what we see today as anti-religious conversions laws and the concept of love jihad that is emerging out of a few states. Let us understand the Special Marriage Act in this context. The Special Marriage Act is a special law enacted to provide for unique form of marriage by registration, wherein, say, a person from a Hindu or a Christian community, Muslim community, Jain, Buddhist, it doesn't matter. So they just have to be citizens of India, or at least people belonging to Indian citizenship and they're living abroad, and they just have to express their consent for getting married. Nothing else is really important. So the fundamental requirement under this act for a valid marriage is this aspect of consent of both parties to the marriage. If both the parties agree for the marriage, that is enough. Race, religion, etc., or the place of birth, all this does not really matter. The bridegroom must be of 21 years at the time of marriage, bride must be of 18 years of the marriage, and this is the minimum age that is required respectively for a boy and a girl to get married as per this act. At the time of their marriage, both parties must be monogamous, that is, they must be unmarried and at the time should not have any living spouse. Even despite the presence of such a law, what is happening is one of the party, either the boy or the girl, are being forced to get converted to a particular religion to adhere to that matrimonial relationship. So contemplating laws to regulate matrimonial relationship between two consenting adults would not be just against the constitutional guarantees but would offend the very notion of individuality and basic freedom. But the ground reality, apart from the theory, is this forced conversion. Again, this is taking away the right to freedom of religion. Say, for example, if a girl wants to marry a Muslim boy, she should not be ideally forced to convert to Islam if she does not wish to. But instead, the couple should get married under Special Marriage Act of 1954. Since there are instances that is not happening and the girl has been forced to convert to other religion, this is the justification provided by the proponents of this kind of anti-conversion laws. So in a way, law is the minimum guarantee to ensure rights. Since on the ground level reality there are chances of forced conversions, this law has ensured that such forced conversions are not taken up and the right to freedom of religion is ensured. So, one kind of fundamental right is being protected by a legal right to ensure that such fundamental rights are not taken away. So, what is the way forward if we don't want this kind of laws which impinge upon right to equality? Or if you fear that there is loss of personal liberty and right to life under Article 21, the only possibility is mainstreaming this Special Marriage Act of 1954. This is the only way, and this requires awareness amongst couples to make this law very famous. Otherwise, this is the only minimum guarantee to avoid this sort of possibilities. We always have to design our institutions for the worst case scenario. So, for the problem of forced conversions, this sort of laws are justified. If this is not needed, then you don't need this sort of problem in our society. So, the only way we can overcome this problem is through awareness generation and behavioral change amongst the couples. That requires a larger societal change as such. Now, that is the gist of this article.